This video demonstrates how you can protect a workbook created with Mac Excel 2016. We'll be creating a protected Mac application that requires activation on the user computer so you can ensure that only licensed users can run your software. The steps in this process involve preparing the workbook, setting up your product license, building the protected Mac application from that workbook and license. We'll then show how to activate it and use the application on a customer computer. And finally, we'll summarize the process and show some of the options involved in the process. In this video, we'll be using the Quick License and Office Protect applications in addition to the Excel application itself. To prepare our workbook, we're going to start by pasting in some VBA code provided with Office Protect into our Excel workbook. We have a plain text editor where we can open up that VBA code, select it, and copy it into the clipboard. Now when we launch our Excel application, we can go to the Developer VBA panel, and under this workbook we can paste in that code. Once we have our VBA code in our workbook, we'll want to password protect the VBA code, maybe hide some sheets, protect some formulas, and once that's all done, we can go ahead and save it out as a macro-enabled Excel workbook, a .xlsm file. In our Documents folder, we have two folders, a source and an output folder, and that source folder is where we put our spreadsheet document that has our VBA code already pasted in. And we also have a default icon that comes with Office Protect, or you can use a tool to create your own icon to apply to your protected application. We're going to be using the Quick License application to define our product license. And before we get started, let's go to the Setup dialog, and we have a path set to the source folder. That's where we're going to generate the ticket file that defines that license. So we'll start by giving a name to the license and a version and security number. You'll see how those parameters are used later. The main thing though, we'll click in this first column and it'll bring up a license dialog where we can name this record of information. And we want to set a few options here. This will be a master ticket of new records. We'll set that checkbox. And these are organizational features. The main thing we're going to be doing is we're going, for this kind of license, we never want to time out, and we want to allow the user to be able to reactivate that license again if needed on the same computer. And from the activation panel, we'll set activation required. It'll be a machine calculated license, and the license will require an activation code to be entered on first launch on the user's computer, and it will be based on a unique request number displayed in that dialog on that user's computer. So those are the main parameters we set up, and at this point we can generate this ticket file that defines that license by just clicking the Make Ticket button. If we now leave out of Quick License and look in our source folder, we now have this ticket file that defines everything about that license. To create our protected application from the workbook and the license we defined, we'll use the Add License Wrapping tool. So we have a number of different records we can use for protecting different workbooks. So for this workbook, let's just give the record a name. We'll call it Budget. And set a checkbox so it opens to that particular record when we launch Add License. So the main thing we're going to do, we're going to select for our application, we'll select that workbook. And here it is. We're going to select the ticket that we want to apply. And there it is. And we want to apply, in addition to selecting the path to the ticket, we'll also put that version and security parameter in there that we saw earlier when we were setting it up in Quick License. We're going to also select the path to an icon that we want to apply to our application, and we're just again using that default icon. And finally, we'll select a folder where we want our generated application to go. And so let's put that into the output folder. There's a couple of other bits of information, the security response and vendor code you'll need to add, and those come from Quick License. So if we go back to our Quick License application on the setup dialog, you'll see there's a big long vendor code here. If you just click that, it'll put it into the clipboard for you, and then you'll be able to paste that into this field. And then we also want to grab this security response calculation and put that into the security response field. So we can close Quick License here. We're almost done. We have one other thing. Since this is an Excel spreadsheet, we can customize the user interface that's presented initially when the user launches the application. And we do so from the Options dialog. We can select the Excel spreadsheet button, and there's a whole bunch of checkboxes for customizing that interface. We won't go into the details of that at the moment. You'll understand a bit later once you actually see the user interface presented what those checkboxes do. But for the moment, let's just set a few of these checkboxes. And we're going to set new, clone, rename, open, quit, export, import, and delete. And that should be good for the moment. So we can click OK. We have all our options set up. We have selected our spreadsheet file, the ticket that defines our license, the icon we want to apply, and the output folder that our generated application is going to go to. And now when we click the build button, it's going to build our protected application and put it into that output folder. Our generated application, which we can rename and distribute it to a user. Before a user can actually launch a protected application, they first need to open the Excel application on their computer, go to Preferences, and within the security panel on a Mac at least, you'll need to clear that warn before opening a file that contains macros. Otherwise, the protected application will not be allowed to run. So once the user has done that, they can quit out of Excel. And so we're going to launch a protected application for the first time. So when the user launches the application, they'll be presented with an activation dialog. It looks something like that, where it shows a unique request number for that specific machine, and the user gives you that number. When you have that number, you'll have to bring up Quick License on your machine and go to the activation panel and insert that request number. And if you click the activation button, it'll show you the activation code required for that user-specific computer. So if we go back to the activation dialog and paste in that activation code, and when the user clicks Activate Now, the application is now permanently activated to run on that computer. And the user will be presented with an open data file window. This is the main user interface that the user is presented with from now on. Whenever they launch the application, they'll see this window. And that's where they can use different named copies of your protected application. When a user wants to create a named copy of your protected workbook, they'll just click the New button and give a name to that copy. Let's just call it Budget 1. And you'll see that item is added to the list. That's just a copy of your spreadsheet that they can open into Excel. Let's do another one. We'll call this one Budget 2. And finally, we'll do one more called Budget 3. So whichever one of these they want to open into Excel, they'll just double click on it and it will now be launched into the Excel application. Once they're in Excel, they'll be able to use the spreadsheet basically however they would normally use a spreadsheet within Excel. The only difference being whenever they make any editing changes, they're not able to save out an unprotected copy of the workbook. Basically, when they save or close the workbook, it just immediately closes down and goes back to that open data file interface window. In fact, we can do that now. Let's just call this budget 1 so you can see that there are changes have been made. And now we'll just go ahead and quit out of Excel. It'll prompt if we want to save changes. Again, that's an optional user interface thing that we set up when we were setting all those checkboxes within Add License. And we decide, once we click yes, it's going to save those changes out to disk and return back to the open data file window. And then the user can then go back into that spreadsheet or any other spreadsheet that they've added to the list here. And if they're finished with your application, they can just click the quit button and it will return back to their desktop. Let's review what we've done so far. We started with an Excel workbook and we pasted in some VBA code, and then we protected maybe some calculations, hid some sheets, but most importantly we password protected the VBA code. Once we had it prepared, we launched the quick license application and defined a license. In this case we used a simple product license that required a manual activation process, but we could have applied like a time-limited trial license, a try-by license, a subscription license, a floating license, or maybe an online serial number activated license. In that case, you would just sell the serial number to the customer, and then on first launch they'd enter the serial number to immediately activate the software. Once everything was set up there, we used the Add License Wrapping tool to apply that license to the spreadsheet and output a protected application that's ready for sale to a customer. If you want to learn more about protecting an Excel workbook or any type of software, you can just go to excelsoftware.com and click on the Protect and License button.